because there is scientific evidence that plasma therapy is helpful.
Dr. Nihar, you have joined? Could you have participated?
Sir, for participant. For participant.
Post
से नीचे कोई पे पोस्ट हो
हमको कन्वर्ट करो कन्वर्ट स्टार्ट हो जाए जो ये सर अपना एआईटी प्लस हम कैमरा टाइम दिया हम ऊपर पोस्ट ये सूरज जो प्रोग्राम था ठीक है शेयर करिए और फिर करो पूरा शेयर स्क्रीन कोड आइटा प्रेजेंटेशन टू शेयर स्लाइड शो हमारा वीडियो तो जाओ जी Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another virtual program by Department of Health and Family Welfare on COVID-19. And this afternoon, we have a little different agenda for all of you. We have a topic on COVID-19 and kidneys. You know, of late, the virus affects the kidneys and many patients of AKI are reported. And to cover that with us, Professor Shiar Kar, the head of nephrology, SAV Medical College, has joined. And our institutional IPC will be covered by Dr. Nihar from WHO in nutshell. Professor CVK Mohanty and our additional DMET, Professor Braja Dash, are in CM review for Ganjam district. So we have requested Dr. Nihar Rai to take up the institutional IPC issue. Besides, we have Dr. Roma Ratan who will be speaking about the lab surveillance. Professor Pani will be speaking to you how you will do the do's and don'ts in critical care management of COVID-19. Dr. Shikata will be speaking you about the infection prevention control, and finally Dr. Thatoi about the donning doffing. So the focus is IPC as the hospitals have started reporting cases from the campus. The doctors, paramedicals are infected. We are focusing on infection prevention control in the campus, but besides other important issues like critical care management as well as the lab surveillance are covered for the general knowledge of all COVID and non-COVID hospitals. So I welcome all of you. We have 100 plus doctors joined already, and we are sure another 100 will join gradually in the program. And without much delay, I would request Dr. Nihar Rai, who is the senior consultant of WHO, who is in charge of Odisha, to start with the initial institutional IPC guidelines, which are very important. He'll also tell you about the checklist that we follow at institutional level to see that the complete IPC measures are taken in each institution. Dr. Nihar Rai.
So good afternoon, all dignitaries, including Dr. Panda and Dr. Kar. My namaskar to all of you and all the participants. With my heartiest regards, here I am just representing the state on this institutional aspect of the infection prevention and control measure. Before that, I would like to just touch upon a few things that I would like to share. That COVID-19 situation is not a normal situation. It's not any ordinary outbreak or epidemic. It's a pandemic. And usually this type of pandemic, the human race faces once in a century. we might be knowing that years back, around 100 years back in 1918, there was a such type of food and continue which damaged the human race at that time with innumerable deaths from 1918 to 1920. And after that, we are facing such type of a pandemic, that is COVID-19. At that time also, 100 years back, you will see from the archive that the only way of treatment was that social distancing, use of mask, and the infection prevention and control measure. So as long as there are no definite treatment, no vaccine is there, so this is the only way. And among them, especially in the healthcare facility, infection prevention becomes a very important aspect. So Odisha, I am really happy to say on behalf of WHO, as a representative of WHO, as I see that in Odisha there is all-round participation, which is led by definitely the state government, health and family welfare department, by Honorable Chief Minister of Odisha, and supported by many number of departments, professionals, including you. And this is very heartening to see that large number of our medical fraternity, including IMA, IAP, the Association of Nursing Homes, and many others who contributed with a huge
participants for attending this session. Now, kidneys is a very important topic. Can I have the first slide, please? So, but in pandemic like such as coronavirus pandemic, we are more concerned. And what are the concerns of a nephrologist or a physician, where you know that there are 19 million cases, its count is increasing every day. The distribution of cases, to some extent, I have tried to show. In some of the countries, this is still going on, and in some of the countries, it has almost come to the lowest ebb. So, what are the things that we have learned in the past 6-7 months when the pandemic started? Mostly, this is a Chinese data from Chinese CDC, where they have said that 80% cases are mild, 5% are critical, and 15% are severe. And age-wise also, when you look at that more than 80 years or 70 years, the case special fatality as well as the seriousness of the cases is higher. And we have been listening day in and day out about these comorbidities which are present in the people, which gives them more susceptibility to this virus or susceptibility to a very bad outcome. They are cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, chronic respiratory diseases, hypertension, and cancer. But not to ignore the deaths that happen in no health condition or previously normal people. In US data, till the end of the April, 37.6% had some comorbidity. 71% of the hospitalized patients and 78% of the patients who were admitted to ICU were having comorbidities. And then we go to the population share of more than 70 years in different parts of the world. In China and Japan, it is around 18.5%. In US, it is 16.2%. In the Western Europe and North Africa. Whereas in India, we have around 3.1% of elderly people who are more than 70 years of old. So our main job is to protect them. Why? We have the evidence by February 2020 that the fatality in Italy was 12.7%. It has got the second largest elderly population in the world. more than 23% of the people are more than 65 years, and more than 98% had at least one, or almost half of the patient had three comorbidities, where the death rate was 8% or 14.8 or nearly about 15% in the confirmed COVID cases. So in Wuhan, where this pandemic originated, they have found out that out of 191 patients who were included in the study, of whom 137 were discharged and 54 died. And out of that, 48% had comorbidities, hypertension being the most common at that time, followed by diabetes and coronary artery disease. So what are the concerns of nephrology or nephrological concerns of the doctors dealing with these cases? We are dealing with a population who have one or more comorbidities. At least they have got CKD. Many of them have hypertension. Many of them have diabetes. And usually they are the older patients. Our patients are more susceptible to develop COVID-19 and more likely to develop severe disease. That we will examine in 12 patients which showed mild disease of blood urea and nitrogen, and 8 patients showed trace proteinuria in 111 COVID-19 confirmed patients without chronic kidney disease. That means they have shown some form of renal abnormalities where they were not previously known CKD patients. All these patients did not meet the diagnostic criteria of AKI. That means, again, very mild form of involvement of kidney was found out as early as February in Wuhan. In addition, 5 patients with CKD were undergoing regular continuous renal replacement therapy before admission were confirmed infection for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. In addition to the therapy for COVID-19, CRRT was also applied 3 times weekly during hospitalization for these 5 patients with CKD. In the course of treatment, the renal function indicator showed stable state in 5 patients in CKD without exacerbation of CKD, and pulmonary inflammation was gradually absorbed. And all these 5 patients with CKD who were on CRRT were survived. There was a publication some time back in Kidney International where they have found out that more than 18 years of age, confirmed COVID diagnosis, no maintenance dialysis, no renal transplanted patients. They had a slightly male preponderance. 42% had some other comorbidity, and 16% death was there. But the prevalence of kidney abnormalities, nearly about 15% had elevated serum creatinine, 13% had elevated blood urea nitrogen, 13% had a eGFR drop below 60, nearly about 40% had proteinuria, and as high as 26% of patients had hematuria, and nearly 5% patients had acute kidney injury. So the conclusion of this study was clinicians should increase their awareness for kidney disease in the patients of COVID-19. So there are various case series which were published after that. Most of them were from China. They showed a variable presence of risk of AKI starting from as low as 3% to as high as 22%. Similarly, here also in the study population, the AKI mortality was higher in the patients who had the initial serum creatinine presentation where it was high. So the overall risk of AKI, even though low, it counted as 3 to 5%. However, in ICU patients, there was a high incidence of AKI, and once a patient develops AKI, the risk of death increases by 25 to 50%. So that is why we are concerned. Another study, kidney impairment is associated with in-hospital death in COVID-19 patient. was published again from China. During hospitalization, AKI was documented in 22 patients, that is 3.2%. Most of the AKI occurred within 7 days after admission. For patients with normal baseline serum creatinine, AKI occurred later and tended to recover more rapidly. However, AKI happened more quickly and severely in patients with elevated baseline serum creatinine. So baseline renal function tests should be done in all admitted cases of COVID-19 patients who were confirmed by RT-PCR. The in-hospital death occurred in 12.5% patients in their study. The incidence of in-hospital death in patients with elevated baseline serum creatinine was 30%, which was significantly higher than patients with normal baseline, which was around 10%. A total of 30 studies, including 53,000 patients with COVID-19, were included in another study. The mean age was about 50 years and slight male preponderance of 55%. The pooled incidence of severity and mortality were 20.2% and 3.1%. So the predictor for disease severity included the old age, not very old, more than 50 years, male sex, smokers, and if they have comorbidities, other comorbidities, especially if they had CKD or chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases or cerebrovascular diseases. Increased lactate dehydrogenase, C-reactive protein, and D-dimer and decreased blood platelet and lymphocyte count were highly associated with a severe form of COVID-19. Again, for death, old age, hypertension, and diabetes were found to be the higher risk predictors. Then another study from Barcelona, Spain, with the country which was affected very severely. Soler et al. Have published a registry of 405 in-center hemodialysis patients hospitalized with COVID-19, among whom there has been 94 deaths. The death was 23%. And among 26 peritoneal dialysis patients, there have been 5 deaths, which is counted as 19%. And 206 kidney transplant patients with COVID-19 where the death was 17%. That means 35 deaths were there. So from this we can know that we are concerned because the either CKD contacting COVID-19 or AKI in previously normal patients, this percentage makes the kidney complications as the second most complications that are seen in, second most common complications that are seen in COVID. So the second concern of the nephrologist is underlying CKD is a strong risk factor for severe disease, and most of my patients have CKD. So I am concerned. Why I am concerned? Then again we'll go back to the studies. Patients exhibited acute renal failure, the elderly patient and cases with comorbidities such as hypertension and heart failure more easily developed ARF, 65% versus 24%. And the hepatoxylin eosil staining of the kidney tissues from post-mortem have severe acute tubular necrosis and lymphocyte infiltrations. Immunohistochemistry showed that the SARS-CoV-2 NP antigen was accumulated in the kidney tubules. The electron microscope observations also demonstrated that virus-like particles are visible in the kidneys. Viral infection not only induces CD68 plus macrophages infiltrated into tubule interstitium, but also enhances the complement C5b9 complex deposition on the tubules. That we'll see in some of the pictures later. These are the pictures which are collected from 6 postmortems, shows severe acute tubular necrosis, no evidence of glomerular pathology. You can see the glomerulus in the middle of all the panels. They are normal. Immunohistochemistry showed NP antigens present. They are arrow marked in the lower panel, middle one. Renal histopathological analysis of 26 postmortem findings again with COVID-19 in China in 26 autopsies, the conclusion was direct parenchymal infection of tubular epithelial cells and podocytes with marked acute tubular injury, and erythrocyte aggregation occurs in severe lethal COVID-19. So that means this virus has got, these are the pictures which shows that the same thing that as I have already described. This is the electron micrographs showing the same thing. So 9 out of 26 had acute tubular injury, few had non-isometric vascular vacuolization. 7 out of 26 patients had presence of virus in the tubular epithelium and podocytes, and nucleoprotein antibody to virus was positive in tubule. That means this virus has got some predilection to the kidneys, and some blood vessels peritubular area were blocked with RBC without platelet or fibrin. So the clinical presentation was with AKI, proteinuria, and hematuria. Associated lesions such as pyelonephritis or drug effect was also seen. 2 had FSGS or focal segmental glomerulosclerotic lesions with food process effacement in their biopsy. The tubular epithelium with reactive nuclei, denudation of Bros borders, glomerulus with tuft collapse, and overlying epithelial hypertrophy and hyperplasia. An ultrastructural examination, which is there in the lower panels, reveals extensive food process effacement and tubular reticular inclusion bodies within the glomerular endothelial cells. So that is one of the concern. The third concern is, where as a nephrologist, I will think, since this virus has got a predilections for the kidney tissue, this virus has tropism for kidney and can cause kidney damage and may persist and can cause a prolonged renal failure. In 30% of autopsies, virus particles were seen in the PCT or proximal convoluted tubule. The AKI in COVID-19 has got multifactorial origin, dehydration leading to pre-renal failure with acute tubular necrosis, toxic tubular damage induced by cytokine storm, which has already everybody is familiar with that term, or it may cause rhabdomyolysis, cytopathic action induced by the virus that invades the ACE2 expressing kidney cells, and drug-induced nephrotoxicity. There are many drugs which we use nowadays, repurposed drugs, which could be nephrotoxic. So I'll not go into the details of this slide, but this has been very aptly described by Claudio Ronco in Nature's Review in April 2020, that cytokine damage, organ crosstalk, and systemic effect, which I have already described, may be the cause of the acute renal failure that we find in these COVID-19 patients. So what are the treatment options we have? One of the option is remove the cytokines by adsorption or removal by using special filters. It has been tried with some good result in Italy by Claudio Ronco, who has personally overseen this thing. The neutralization of cytokines IL-6 by tocilizumab, and some of the antiviral drugs which so far has not proved of any proven benefit are lopinavir, ritonavir, and one of the much talked about drug is remdesivir. Effectiveness of convalescent plasma therapy in severe COVID-19 patients have been beneficial in many of the studies, even to a limited extent, but still many of the places the trial is going on. We had the experience of SARS-CoV-1 infections where this has been used, and one dose of 200 ml of convalescent plasma is derived from recently recovered donors with neutralizing antibody titer above 1:640 transfused to the patients, and it has shown good result. The clinical symptoms were significantly improved along with increase of oxyhemoglobin saturation within 3 days. The fourth concern of the nephrologist or the doctors is, can I continue to use ACE inhibitor ARB in my patients? As we have known that the virus enters and then it can get attached to the ACE2 receptors, and then it needs TMPRSS2 for its priming, and then it enters the cell. So ACE2 expression besides lung has been seen to be present in liver, heart, more so in the kidneys and in the blood vessels. The virus spike protein fuses with the ACE2 receptor before entering the cell. Then it interacts with the TMPRSS2 receptor and which primes it. It is inside the cell, it fuses with the endosomes and multiplies in the acidic milieu. In patient with ASI and ARVs, there is a upregulation of receptors. But is it useful to the virus? Maybe there is an increased shedding of the receptors. Maybe after binding to TMPRSS2, it does not interact with the ACE receptor. Maybe angiotensin 2 causes configurational changes, and increase in angiotensin 1 to 7 counters the vasoconstriction and fibrotic effects. Then the fifth concern of the nephrologist is the manpower. More and more COVID warriors being infected by the virus itself worldwide, it will definitely deplete my work strength in my dialysis unit and my transplant unit. Worldwide, as millions of people stay home to minimize the transmission of severe acute respiratory syndrome, healthcare workers prepare to do exactly the opposite. They'll go to the clinics, they'll go to the hospital, put themselves at high risk for COVID-19. And the figure from China's National Health Commission show that more than 3,300 healthcare workers have been infected as early as March. At least 9,000 US healthcare workers are sickened with COVID-19. This is the CDC data. High proportion of healthcare workers with COVID-19 in Italy, a stark warning to the world, protecting the nurses, protecting the other healthcare workers and the doctors must be the number one priority. 9% of Italy's COVID cases are healthcare workers. Out of Spain's 40,000 confirmed coronavirus cases, nearly 14% are medical professionals. So we must, since we have been getting into this pandemic little later than those countries, we must be very, very careful in protecting ourselves, our families, so also our colleagues. So outcome of COVID-19 is bad for aged population and those with comorbidities. The raised baseline creatinine suggests poor outcome. Overall risk of AKI is low, but this is the second leading cause of death in ICU. Cytokine storm, pre-renal, direct cytopathic effects are some of the proposed mechanism of AKI, but we have not heard the last word about this. We are still in the learning phase. Supportive care is the key therapeutic strategy. Plasma therapy is one of the definite hopes for the present, and holding your team together is the key challenge, not only for the nephrologist of today, but also for all the doctors, because doctors are the leaders of other healthcare workers. So 10% of healthcare professionals shall get affected. This is the estimate. 20 to 50% of absenteeism rate is a norm in globally. The dialysis work will increase because of the patient load. You have the patients who are on dialysis already and they are maintenance dialysis patients where they cannot be denied treatment, and new patients will be definitely added on, including COVID and non-COVID diseases, which causes renal failure. Only outpatients works needs to be reorganized, but others we have to do. So I thank you very much in this COVID pandemic era. Lastly, I will say that it is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. We have to work and then we have to be safe, and we also must pronounce safety for all our colleagues. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I will be happy to answer the questions at at the end if you have any doubts.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your elaborate description on nephrologist view in COVID-19 and sparing time from your busy schedule of so many patients. I have attended sir's OPD where sir was surrounded with so many people waiting for his attention, and even in COVID times he was so fearless and going out and talking to each and one of them. So, and out of which immediately when we tested, out of them few became positive also. So thank you, sir. Thank you so much for taking time, and sir will be answering all your questions at the end of the session. Now I introduce you to Associate Professor Dr. Sikata Nanda Madam, who is going to tell you about infection prevention and control, a very important topic during this COVID times. And without not wasting any time of yours, let me allow Madam to take over. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, very good afternoon to all of you. So we'll be talking about infection prevention and control, environmental cleaning, and biomedical waste management of COVID-19 waste. Now, what is exactly infection prevention and control? This is not a new terminology. Infection prevention and control, it is a method which is designed to prevent harm that is caused by infections to the patients, healthcare providers, to our community. And we have institutional infection prevention committee that is existent since years. Now, the benefits of infection prevention and control rests in protecting our own selves, that is as healthcare providers, protecting the patients, the family, community, and environment. Now, how do we meet the preparedness? We prepare ourselves by strengthening the infection prevention and control in order to reduce the transmission of the disease process, and we enhance the safety of the healthcare personnel, and thereby we also prevent any impending outbreak in any disease process. Now, the general advice which is given to during the time of COVID-19 is to avoid close contact with people suffering from acute respiratory tract infection, ILI or SARI. Then do persistently, religiously hand hygiene, and then people with symptoms are asked to do respiratory etiquette or respiratory hygiene, wear a medical mask or a triple layered surgical mask, and then seek medical care or advice as and when necessary. The IPC strategy revolves around applying standard precautions for all patients, and we ensure at all times triaging based on the severity of the symptoms, the ones who are more symptomatic or serious, then comes the one who are moderately symptomatic, and then those having minimal symptoms, and then of course the symptomatic ones. And early recognition of these symptoms, and then whether the patient will be sent to the isolation ward or to the COVID hospitals. Now, there are certain administrative controls which have been undertaken, and the use of environmental and engineering controls too. Now, the standard precautions that are implemented through the IPC is to be used for all patients and at all times. And before that, risk assessment has to be done. Now, coming to this telemedicine center, I did not wear a PPE kit or a hazmat suit. Now, what all is necessary is simply a mask and maintaining social distancing or physical distancing, and of course sanitizing my hands. Now, risk assessment is done before dealing with the patients based on the severity of the patient's condition. Now, the standard precautions course around 8 elements. That is frequent hand hygiene, then respiratory hygiene or respiratory etiquette. Now, personal protective equipment according to the risk involved in dealing with the patients, then safe injection practices and shaft management, and how to prevent needle stick injury or maybe other forms of injury, maybe splashes or spills during handling with the body fluids. Then safe handling and cleansing and disinfection of the patient care equipment, maybe stethoscopes, our blood pressure instruments, the cuffs, and then we have the thermometers. Then cleansing of the room, the OT, the wards, that involves environmental cleaning. Then safe handling and cleaning of the soil linen, and waste management. Now, as such, there is least transmission of the disease, or rather least transmission of the organism which is contaminated, maybe an example table. It is only through the use of the hands that we spread the germs from one place to another. Now, WHO has constituted the 5 moments which is followed, that is in regards to hand hygiene. The first one is before touching the patient, we have to sanitize our hands. Then before doing any clean or aseptic procedure, number 2. Number 3, after body fluid exposure or risk, that is maybe a peritoneal fluid tap or a pleural fluid tap. Then number 4, hand sanitizing is done after touching a patient. Number 5, after touching the patient's surroundings. Now, there are 2 ways we can sanitize or we can do the hand hygiene or wash our hands. Number 1, if it is visibly dirty or contaminated, then we need to wash it with soap and water for about 40 to 60 minutes. If it is not visibly soiled, then we can rub our hands for 20 to 30 seconds with an alcohol-based hand rub. Now, all the 6 steps is well known to all of us. Now, next comes respiratory hygiene or the respiratory etiquette. Now, when we are suffering from cold and cough, we need to turn our head away while sneezing and coughing. And we should remember always to cover the mouth and the nose with a tissue paper or with a handkerchief. And the tissues should be discarded immediately into a foot-operated bin if possible. And clean our hands either with soap and water or with alcohol-based products. And if no tissue paper or handkerchief is available, then it is best to use the sleeves of our shirt, that is near the elbow, and we should not spit here and there. Now, by triaging, we do timely and effective infection control, wherein we admit the patients in the dedicated area. Now, in triaging, when a patient comes to a fever clinic, our first and foremost is to prevent overcrowding. The visitors are not allowed to enter into the triaging area, and we see that the entry and exit are at different points. They don't have a single entry and exit, and rapid triaging is done so that the patients are not allowed to wait. And in case we have some dedicated waiting areas, it should be adequately ventilated. There should be free flow of air, and when the patients enter into the triaging areas, they should perform hand hygiene. It is mandatory for all of them to wear a mask, and we should provide foot-operated hand sanitizer or with disposable napkins, and of course a foot-operated dustbin or a receptacle to carry the trash. Then at least in the waiting area, there should be 1 meter distance should be maintained between the patients. Adequate signage should be there inside the waiting room, so that what are the do's and don'ts that the patient should follow. Then a thermometer, that is an infrared thermometer, should be there wherein we can measure the temperature, body temperature, and we should keep documentation of all the necessary papers of the individuals, and we have there should be display or an algorithm of the triage, that is, which shows where to go if these symptoms appear, And besides that, there should be a screening questionnaire wherein details like international, earlier we were including international travel. Presently we have included a visit from hotspot areas or travel to hotspot areas. Now, the family members, like I mentioned, to wait outside the triage area. Similarly, in the OPD, early triage and early recognition of the symptoms should be done, and they should be admitted based on the cohort, and with special emphasis on hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and medical masks. And we should prioritize according to the symptoms of the individual, and at the same time educate the patients and the families. Now, adequate training of the healthcare workers or the healthcare providers is part of the administrative controls, and adequate patient to staff ratio needs to be maintained. However, we should not forget that active surveillance is um, not to be carried anymore, because as active surveillance for ILI and SARI is a part and it has to be continued. Similarly, monitoring of these healthcare workers with specific IPC checklist has to be provided so that we can find out whether they're following the standard precautions and the universal precautions or not. Now, only use of mask will not prevent against COVID-19, because use of mask will sends a false sense of security, and also ineffective or incorrectly used mask, it hampers its effectiveness. So the fit test has to be done before use of the mask, and we should avoid touching the mask. Many times we see people hanging the mask around the neck, or they're having it in the pockets, and we should use single-use masks and dispose them as quickly as possible. And we should replace the mask once it becomes damp or humid, and after removal also we should just wash our hands with either soap or water or with a hand sanitizer. Now, environmental decontamination is broadly divided into two groups: those areas which are having minimal hand contact, that is in the low touch surfaces, that is the floors and the ceilings, and those having the high touch surfaces, those having frequent hand contact. Now, the door handles, the light switches, the bed rails, and the edges of the curtains in the patient's room, they are highly infected. Now, they need to be sterilized, or they need to be disinfected with 1% sodium hypochlorite, and the roof and the floor with 0.5%. Now, besides this, the room floor can be cleaned at least minimum twice to thrice a day, and with sodium hypochlorite solution, with warm water, and also with any water with detergent. That is the 3-bin system, and that has to be done by the cleaning personnel wearing appropriate PPE, and they need to have an appropriate checklist so that they are accountable, and they can be given feedback by supportive supervision. And all the cleaning accessories are to be kept outside the patient's room. And once the patient gets shifted or is discharged from the room should be kept open for about 45 minutes to 1 hour, and then the mopping can be done. However, brooming of the room or should not be done. Wet mopping can be done, and no fumigation is allowed. Now, for the spill management is categorized. Spills are categorized into two types, that is small spills and large spills. Spill more than 10 ml is categorized as large spill. Spill less than 10 ml is categorized as small spill. For small spill, you have 1% sodium hypochlorite. For large spills, you have 10% sodium hypochlorite solution. And you can use absorbent cotton. First, we cotton that area. We can use absorbent cotton or even newspaper, and then we mop it, and then we use detergent with it, and then we clean it. Now, spraying and fogging, like I said, it should not be done, and it has proven no special benefits. Now, this waste management in regards to COVID-19, you can get COVID-19 waste from PHC, sub-center, quarantine homes, from camps, TMCs, and also sample collection centers. This year, 4 times this was revised, biomedical waste under the CB on 18th March, on 25th March, 18th April, and on the latest is on 10th June. Now we have the 4 color-coded bins into which the normal biomedical waste is thrown, which is categorized: yellow, human anatomical waste, soil waste, expired drugs, we have blood bags, and so on. Red, we have recyclable plastics, white, sharps, and blue, of course, we have glassware and metallic implants. It remains as such. What is in addition to this existing rules, what CPCW has done is that they have included that in every COVID ward, they should have COVID-19 waste. That is, the red and the yellow bins need to be labeled as COVID-19 waste. And they had to be kept in separate bins, which are foot operated. And the bins should have double layered bags, that is 2 bags, so that it is of adequate strength and it has no leaks. Now the waste generated in the COVID wards are like N95, triple mask, head cover, shoe cover, disposable linen, disposable linen, and so on. They are thrown into the yellow bag. There can be food waste material like leftover food, disposable plates, glass, masks, tissues, toiletries. These are again thrown into the yellow bag. Diapers. Now the question comes regarding fecal management. A person, COVID-19 confirmed patient excreta, who uses diaper, that should be thrown into the yellow bag. Of course, we can use NOACL 1% and then it can be thrown into the yellow bag or the yellow bin. And for those of all who are those patients using bedpan, the feces can be washed in the toilet, and then again it is to be, the bedpan will be cleaned with detergent and then disinfected with 0.5% chlorine solution or sodium hypochlorite solution. Now the other waste that are plastics, the goggles, face shield, the hazmat suits, the splash proof apron, the plastic cover overall, the nitrile gloves, and of course the plastic bottles which are used for drinking purpose, drinking water, all of them need to be thrown into the red bag with the biohazard sign and with a marking COVID-19 waste. Now coming to ETF or liquid waste management responsibility, it is the responsibility of the healthcare facilities, isolation wards. Now the ETP plants, that the effluent treatment plant, which treats the wastewater, and after treatment of the wastewater, in no way it should be used or reused. Now coming to linen management, the soil bed linen or the clothes which are used, they are to be put into a bag which is clearly mentioned as COVID-19 waste, and then the bags double layered in the yellow bag. However, it has to be then transported to a bucket wherein then it is to be sent to the washing machine, that institutional dedicated washing machine or the laundry, where warm water of 60 to 90 degrees centigrade and with the detergent, it is to be washed, then it is to be air dried. Now if institutional washing machine is not available for any reason, the linens can be soaked in hot water in an utensil with soap or detergent. A big long stick is to be used for stirring. At the same time, the person should wear PPE kit so that there's no splashing, and then it has to be cleaned. Then again it is to be soaked with 0.5% NOCL for a contact period of 30 minutes, and finally it is cleaned with plain water, and then it is left in the sunlight for air dry. Now general solid waste are of course found in those patients which are not contaminated by secretions or any sort of body fluids. Maybe discarded papers, empty water bottles, empty juice bottles, even the fruit peel-ups of oranges and apples. Then it must be As far as possible, we should use non-disposable items. That is, we should use the steel plates and the glasses where the patient uses, and it can be washed and it can be reused, because this disposable items during COVID times has created a lot of waste. Now, cleaning of the bins with the inside and the outside has to be cleaned or disinfected with 1% sodium hypochlorite solution on a daily basis. And a separate record of COVID-19 waste is to be maintained by the house personnel and countersigned by the BMW collector. Now, in the laboratory, again, pre-treatment viral transfer VTM media is done, plastic vials, vacutainers, and then it is to be thrown in the red bags and goes to the CBWT. Then, what are the responsibilities in the quarantine camps or the TNCs or in home? Now, now in the household, the general waste go to the municipal solid waste by the municipal collector. However, in those houses where the patient is in isolation, COVID-19, minimal symptoms or with no symptoms, that is asymptomatic individuals, and we think that they are contaminated with secretions or with any sort of body fluids, then it has to be disposed of in the yellow bag, like the gloves and the mask. Now, as such, when we return back home, the gloves and the masks used by us, that is by non-COVID-19 individuals, we should keep it in the paper bag for about 72 hours and then dispose it in the same way as the general waste, of course, after cutting it, so that to prevent reuse it. Now, in the yellow, however, in those households which have minimal or asymptomatic individuals, they can throw it in a separate yellow colored bag. And in the urban local bodies are the ones who provide them with the yellow bags. And then there's a registered nodal person also of that area who keeps the CPCB's biomedical waste tracking apps. The same thing is there in the quarantine camps also. Ideally, in the quarantine camps, they do not have a yellow bin or a red bin. However, they can be provided with a yellow bin, and which can be disinfected with sodium hypochlorite solution. And then normally they dig big holes and they put the masks and the gloves. Now, if biomedical waste, if there's a person at home with minimal symptoms or with no asymptomatic individuals, these yellow bags which are present, they can be collected by the authorized waste collectors, and then they can be those persons engaged in the CBWTF, they can go to the doorstep and collect it. Now, how do we do this biomedical waste management when we are shifting a patient or when we are transporting or handling the patients? Now, within 20 minutes, the ambulances actually reach those hospitals, because they are ideally located in the hospitals or near the police stations. Now, those wearing the PPE, that should be disposed of in the yellow bag, and then the inside and the outside should be sprayed with 1% sodium hypochlorite solution. Now, the CBWTF, that is Common Biomedical Waste Treatment Facility, it is ideally present within the 75 kilometers radius. In case in those areas which do not have more than less than 10,000 beds, in those areas they can cater to the nearest CBWTF within the range of 150 kilometers. Otherwise, in hilly areas or in hard to reach areas, 2 districts can be clubbed. At times, in difficult terrains also, again, 2 districts can be clubbed. Now, however, the CBWTF operator, it is its duty to register the COVID-19 BMW tracking apps, which is developed by the CPCB, and they have to do the registration of the waste handler. It is mandatory. Now CPCB digital app is like this one, which has been shown. It is under the Central Pollution Control Board. And during the COVID time, it is not mandatory for the State Pollution Control Board to see that whether it is maintaining as per the protocol and whether it is registered or not. I'm talking about the quarantine center or the TMC. Now, these are the 4 times that in this year, during the COVID-19 outbreak, the CPCB biomedical waste guidelines have been revised. Once in 18th March, then again in 25th March, once on 18th April, and the latest is on 10th June. Which 10th June is the one which has included the urban local bodies. So this comes to the end of my presentation. This biomedical waste is not my duty or your duty. In fact, it is a collective social responsibility, and we all have to take active participation so that our environment doesn't become contaminated with this waste. And at the same time, it is our role. We have a major role in implementing proper infection prevention and control in our institution to prevent any further outbreak of the disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sikata, for excellent presentation. Any question you have, please write in the chat box, or after all the sessions will be over, we'll have a group discussion. That time you can put your questions also. Thank you, Sikata. Now I request Dr. Roma Ratan. She will elaborate you about the laboratory testing. She is the Associate Professor of Department of the Biochemistry, SCV Medical College, Cuttack.
Thank you, ma'am. This slide. Thank you for joining us. Today we will discuss laboratory surveillance and SOP for testing of COVID-19. Repeatedly we are changing the slides. Every day we are getting new information and about who to be tested and what are the testing methods or facilities available. Now for COVID-19, WHO says test, test, test. That's how we can control it. But a virus which has already undergone some 50,000 changes in its proteins, undergone so many mutations, and some articles presently, though they have not yet been published in Lancet, but still these articles, these researchers are saying that these mutations have made the virus more contagious and less virulent. That is, it is killing less but infecting more. So who can be tested? Now, if you have a symptoms of cough, fever, difficulty in breathing, you have a travel history, not only to international places, but even to districts which are hotspots, to areas in your town which are hotspots, you have to be tested. Any healthcare worker taking care of a SARI or ALI patient or with a COVID-19 patient ward is to be tested. Hospitalized patients need to be tested. Direct and high-risk contacts of COVID-19 confirmed cases need to be tested between day 5 and day 14, but most often we say the ideal day is day 7. Anybody living in that same household of a confirmed case needs to be tested. Now, where to be tested? You have to be tested in a permitted government laboratory or in a private laboratory which is NABL or NABH accredited. Both the government and private laboratory require to be registered under ICMR. They have to have a user ID and a password. Only then they can be the facilities. They can provide the testing facility. Now, what sample to be tested? We can test the throat swab or the nasal swab. Now for a bronchoalveolar lavage, tracheal aspirate, sputum, all this requires different containers and different facilities. But presently, whatever kits we are having tests either the throat swab or the nasal swab. Within 3 days of symptom onset and no later than 7 days is the optimal timing for testing. And before starting any chemoprophylaxis or any therapy, you need to be tested. Now, if the COVID patient is having certain comorbid conditions and you want to test for the blood sugar, for the lipid profile, for any other parameter or the renal function test, you have to collect in the requisite standard tubes. And in case of serum, you have to collect it in a resin separator tube so that during centrifugation, we don't need to do a centrifugation and the aerosol generation is minimum. Now, when you have collected the sample, the laboratories who are having collection sites, only the collection sites and are having MOUs with RT-PCR centers or other laboratories, they need to be very careful about the packaging. The first packet is the VTM, the throat swab, which is put in the VTM or the viral transport medium. That has to be kept in a airtight and a screw cap plastic container, which is spill proof. That again needs to be put in a second container, and the second container has to be sealed into a third container. Now, all this requires absorbent material surrounded by absorbent material so that it is spill proof. Like today, we have got samples from districts of Kandhamal, from Bhadrak, Bargarh, Balesore, Angul, Dhenkanal, and a few of the Kandhamal samples, maybe because of the distance travel, 15 samples are, the VTM is half full, has spilled, and so again we would ask for a, we have mailed it to the district so that they can make some arrangement. Now, while labeling the package, you have to write that it's a biological hazard symbol has to be there. It is category B by WHO. The temperature should be maintained, so ice pack has to be given, an upright arrow has to be made, and an emergency number and telephone number has to be written of the sender and the receiver. So on the way also, if any doubt or anywhere there is any problem, they can call up. Now, what are the different tests available? The different tests that are available are rapid antigen tests from ST Biosensors. Why this particular company? I'm not a brand ambassador of the company, but because this is the company or this is the kit that has been approved by ICMR and validated by ICMR and AIIMS New Delhi. So we have been asked by the government of India to use only these kits. Now, who are the ideal persons in whom rapid antigen test will be used? I will discuss in my next slide. The next test that is available is antibody testing, ELISA or CLIA kit. And these are the antibodies that they are testing is IgG, and IgM can also be tested, but mostly IgG is being tested. The other tests available are the TrueNAT, CVNAT, and RT-PCR. Now, this is the antigen COVID-19 antigen testing. You collect the nasal swab, okay, not the throat swab. The nasal swab, put it inside the viral transport medium, mix it, then take 3 drops from that VTM, put it in the cartridge. Within 15 minutes, you see a line, a control line and a test line. You have to take the reading within 25 minutes, and the test has to be conducted within 1 hour of sample collection, because beyond that the sample is invalid, and after 30 minutes the test is invalid. So you're not supposed to read it after 30 minutes. These are the testing that is being done in our hospital, where you can see so many antigen tests is being done in different OPD sites. We have been doing antigen testing in super specialty block, in the casualty, in the radiodiagnosis, in the medicine OPD, in rheumatology, in all OPDs. So wherever, in many points at SCB, we are doing these antigen tests before any procedure or admission of the patient. Now, rapid antigen test is recommended as a point of care testing. In all hospitals, laboratories, state government intends to perform point of care antigen tests, and that too, these hospitals, whether private or government, should be having user ID and password from the ICMR. Now, who are the ideal candidates in which rapid antigen test is to be done is often a query. Now, rapid antigen test is to be done on any suspect, any person you suspect that it needs that is suspect case of COVID. Any non-COVID or non-healthcare professional or non-high-risk person but is seeking an admission or a hospitalization needs to be tested with this antigen test for COVID. Now, this belongs to patients who are suffering from malignancy, patients who are immunocompromised, patients with HIV, transplant patients, elderly patients more than 65 years old, patient with neurological, cardiological diseases, patients with diabetes, hypertension, and any person who requires an elective surgery or a procedure or an emergency procedure has to undergo an antigen test, because this is a rapid antigen test. Even in non-surgical places where a bronchoscopy is required, where endoscopy is required, there also rapid antigen testing has to be done. Now, ICMR recommends all these points like government, containment zones, private hospitals, laboratories, anywhere, but all of them have to be approved by ICMR. That means they have to have a user ID and a password so that they can do portal entry for the test that they are conducting. Now, all asymptomatic negative patients of antigen test have to undergo a reverse transcriptase real-time quantitative PCR for COVID-19. So the lab, which is doing a rapid antigen test only, has to sign a MOU with the nearest facility who is conducting RT-PCR. Okay, so anybody in the RT-PCR, anybody in the antigen rapid antigen test, anybody who is positive is a true positive, because this is a very specific test. When it comes to sensitivity, it fails. Why it fails? Because in the nasal swab, sometimes the virus collection is very low. So sometimes it fails. So if a person is asymptomatic and negative, you can let go. But if a person is negative but symptomatic, then you have to perform a RT-PCR before saying that this person is a true negative. So rapid antigen test does not detect the true negative. It detects the true positive. Now, coming to the next test available is the IgG antibody test. Now, this is a serosurveillance test. This test is done to see whether that person has had an infection prior to 2 weeks. So, this is not a diagnostic test, but it is a test to show that, yes, this person had an infection, had an history that he is having an infection. So, this is a serosurveillance test which is being conducted by the government to see how many people in a containment zone had the infection, how many immunocompromised individuals had the infection, are the healthcare workers or the frontline workers were asymptomatic during the infection. Now, these are the VTMs that we receive. These are our students, postgraduate students, technicians, alicotting the samples, doing an RNA extraction. Then this is a TrueNAT or a TrueNAT platform, which is a microchip based PCR, RT-PCR. Now here also, it is doing an RNA extraction. That cartridge is doing an RNA extraction, and here the microchip is doing an RT-PCR. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of TrueNAT? Biggest advantage is its portability. Anywhere, everywhere, you just need to have a biosafety measures, biosafety cabinet, and put this machine, and you can do an RT-PCR. Minimal expertise is required. You can train a technician in a single day, and then the gentleman can perform this RT-PCR. Now, the disadvantage is true positive is not available here. A TrueNAT is true negative, and here it is we are only having the screening cartridges, screening chips. Now, once we get the confirmatory gene chip, we would be giving TrueNAT as a confirmatory test also, confirmatory true positive. Another disadvantage is it can run 4 samples maximum at a single time. So here the extraction is around 13-14 minutes and an RT-PCR is 45 minutes. So report is ready almost in 1 hour, but maximum 4 samples it can do. So in a day, 36 samples will be the highest that a TrueNAT machine can do. Now, this is the conventional real-time reverse transcriptase quantitative RT-PCR that we are doing at SCB, and this is one of our postgraduates preparing the plate. Now, here also you can observe the areas where PPE is being worn, what type of protective equipment is worn, and where it is being worn. So, depending on the situation, an individual can wear PPE in which zone that person is working. Now, in molecular diagnostics, where we say reverse transcriptase is the gold standard of testing, here we are checking for the E gene and the RDRP gene. Now, why I'm speaking on the E gene? E gene is the screening gene for the virus or COVID-19. What are the confirmatory genes available? One confirmatory is the RDRP, another is the N gene. These are the confirmatory genes that is available by different manufacturers. So to summarize my whole slide set, you have to decide and plan in which patient, where I have to, I want this test done. What is the type of test to be done? In which site I have to do this test? And during sample collection, transportation, test, and reporting, everywhere you have to see the biosafety measures, and you have to ensure that you do a portal entry. That is mandatory. Thank you. Hoping that COVID-19 ends.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a nice presentation by Dr. Uma Ratan, and she has told how the tests they stand and how should you go about deciding the test, which test, and when to do, and how the results are expected, the principles of different tests. We'll take up the questions at the end. I will have 2 short presentations, one by Professor Nivedita Pani about do's and don'ts in the ICUs in patients of COVID-19, followed by a presentation of Downing coughing. So Professor Pani is a professor of anesthesia, is in COVID war since beginning, and she has presented about many other topics to you all. And today we have taken up the topic of do's and don'ts in critical care management of COVID-19. So ma'am will tell you, and whatever your doubts, please type or keep it to ask at the end. Professor Nivedita Pani.
Good afternoon. What we should do and what we should not do in critical care management. So, what are the sources of the potential aerosol generation during airway management? Because in the critical care, we are handling the ICU, and we are also in the ward, we are giving the oxygenation. So, what are the things causes aerosol generating, like coughing, sneezing, expectorating, and we are also using NIV or positive pressure ventilation with inadequate seal and high flow nasal oxygenation, jet ventilation, delivery of the nebulized and atomized medication by simple face mask. As you know, in the home we give also nebulization to a patient, and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, and also tracheal extubation. So if you look at that, why there is this aerosol comes out. If you do a tracheal suction, then definitely there will be aerosol. Laryngoscopy, tracheal intubation, bronchoscopy, gastroscopy, and sometimes you can't intubate, condition, you have to do a tracheostomy or cricothyrotomy. That time also you come across with aerosol generation. Let us see how it happens. If you do a bronchoscopy or upper GI endoscopy, there will be induced cough, respiratory tract, and GI secretion that will cause the infection. CPR, there will be induced cough and respiratory tract. NIV, if you put a NIV mask, possible mechanical dispersal of the aerosol of the respiratory tract. Endotracheal intubation, there will be induced cough and respiratory tract. Mask ventilation, possible mechanical dispersion of the aerosol. If you are conducting a surgery, like surgery of the bone and tendon and irrigation of the aerosol blood, all these things will create. And sputum induction or physiotherapy induced cough. And nebulization therapy, possible mechanical dispersal of the aerosol. If you do a suctioning of the patient, possible mechanical dispersion of the aerosol. So how to avoid? You should do a intensive training early intervention, meticulous planning, visual and infection control, efficient airway management process, clear communication, and standardized practice. So when you are making all this preparation, first advanced planning should be there, clear communication be there, and so many people should not be in that room, and the most experienced provider should be available and focus on the safety, promptness, and reliability. So what you should do? You should use a negative pressure room. We don't have. What should you do then? If not available, place the patient in a single room and close the door. If no rooms available, isolate the patient and ensure with other patient or health care worker maintain more than 6 feet distance. And wear a full PPE, which we will be telling later, like a 95 mask, eye protection, hood, fluid resistance, well-fitting gown, and double gloves. So you know, when a patient desaturate, what we have to do? Bag and mask ventilation also you'll do. So you look at the picture. When you do a bag and mask ventilation, don't wear single hand. Put two hands and tell your assistant to slowly ventilate and put a viral filter so that the aerosol will not go outside. Look at the picture. How these two hands, one person will catch and other person will gently ventilate with a low flow of 3 to 4 liters per minute. You know, when the patient are become very sick, we use the high level of this high flow oxygenation. But you remember, this high flow oxygenation is very much aerosol, create aerosol, and it will be very dangerous for the healthcare worker. Positive pressure ventilation areas should be ideally avoided. And when you are using it, last time I have told nasal prong and all this non-breathing mask, all these things also, if you put a high flow also, there will be aerosol. So you have to put a mask covering it. Then when you are ventilating also, suppose the patient respiration arrest has come on, you have to slowly ventilate. Don't go on ventilating too fast. If you go on ventilating, then what will happen? There will be common aspersion of the aerosol and it will create aerosol to the healthcare worker. So when you are using high flow oxygenation or non-invasive mask or this helmet, you should be very careful. See that there should be less leakage so it will not create problem to the healthcare worker. These are the things which create the aerosol. Like if you ventilate like this, if you create a endotracheal intubation, so you have to be very cautious while doing this. In the laryngoscopy and tracheal intubation, once you have intubated, don't auscultate the chest. Just with the eyeball, try to visualize the chest wall expansion, and if any doubt, go for a long ultrasound. Because if you have come closer to the patient, then definitely you will imbibe the aerosol. So post-intubation also, if you have intubated the patient, take out the pair of the gloves, discard disposable equipment, and after leaving the room, ensure the doffing of the PPE and clean the room 20 minutes after tracheal intubation. After that only you can enter. And during extubation, you should follow certain rules. Like suppose you are covering, like this picture you see, he is covering a plastic cover. But you see that this plastic cover also self-contamination may be increased due to collection of the viral containing secretion, for which you have to be very careful. So you should wear a well-covered PPE. See how you will extubate? The patient endotracheal tube is there. Just put a mask with a viral filter. Then he is putting the mask with a viral filter. Remove the cough. Slowly you draw the tube. Then put the mask tightly so that no aerosol will come. Then next step what we'll do? Put that another filter mask above it. See, any infection will come out or any aerosol that will be absorbed in the two viral filters. This is the procedure of doing or do's in case of the extubation to a COVID patient. Next, CPR. Just remember, when any person fallen down, you tell, hey, are you all right? Then put our ear close to the patient's chest and try to listen his respiration. Don't do in case of the COVID patient. Always, because you know if the patient is not intubated, then there will be aerosol will be there. You have to be very careful. So aim for an early tracheal intubation before doing a CPR. So you remember that unless we are presented with new evidence, CPR should be considered as the high risk procedure with a high potential for the aerosol generation. Sometimes what happens, patient remains on the ventilator, we may require the tracheostomy. So try to shift it 2 to 3 weeks from the intubation. If you are doing a tracheostomy, then remember that you must wear a PPE, avoid circuit disconnection, HME with a viral filter must be present. Sometimes it happened you may have to do a tracheostomy procedure. Just remember, in a can't situation, we have to do this EFONA procedure. You have to be very careful to avoid aerosolization of virus containing fluid when the tracheal is punctured. You remember all endoscopic procedure, particularly upper GI, is very, very risky and create aerosol. Unless and until required, please don't do the GI endoscopy unless and until required. I specifically telling you, don't go for GI endoscopy unless and until it's required. Non-invasive ventilation, you can do it, but if the mask is tight, then you can use it. Otherwise, it will create the aerosol. The nebulization, you remember if the patient is spontaneously breathing, dry powder inhaler, metered dose inhaler, you can do it. But in a ventilated patient, vibrating mesh nebulizer, additional filter to be placed at the expiratory port of the ventilation. This nebulization treatment, there is evidence that there is increases of the transmission to healthcare worker. So bronchoscopy, unless and until it is needed, you don't do it. If it is needed only, if it is absolutely indicated, go for the bronchoscopy. Suctioning also causes aerosolization and increased risk of the transmission. How will you do a suction? Look at the picture. You do a closed suction. Just remember how the vacuum source is directly connected to the tube, and we do a closed suction so that there will be no aerosol creep. And if you are using the HME filter, change when soiled within 5 to 7 days. And remember, suppose there is any circuit disconnection in the ventilator, don't worry, clamp the endotracheal tube, put the ventilator on the standby mode. And decontamination, ventilators and mechanical devices should be protected with a high efficiency viral filter. And all these filters should be changed when visibly soiled or every 24 hours. You know, we tell somebody is coughing, or let's try for a respiratory physiotherapy. Please don't do the respiratory physiotherapy. It's contraindicated, like diaphragmatic breathing, incentive spirometry, respiratory muscle training, because they create the aerosol and it increases the increased work of breathing. And equipment, you know, when a patient is in the room, disposable crockery, cutlery, all these things also, you have to be used and decontaminated way. Another thing, if the patient is using stethoscope, pulse oximetry, ultrasound probes, this has to be disinfected before you are using. So try to clean with the alcohols and then you can use it. Sepsis. Patient is in a very sepsis condition. What you should do? Avoid excessive fluid resuscitation and do not use hypotonic crystalloid, starches, gelatin for resuscitation. Use a conservative fluid management strategy for ARDS patient without tissue hyperfiltration, and recommended against using a low dose dopamine for renal protection. You can start with a NARAD if required for a dobutamine, but don't go for a low dose dopamine. Communication is very important. Use of digital media for communication with patient family. It helps in reducing the traffic and exposure of the healthcare worker. Maintain communication with other hospital and healthcare worker in the dynamic situation. Use of digital media by relatively stable patient to communicate with their relative. Other tips, having thorough infection control practice. This is the do's. Training of staff regarding correct use of PPE. Conduct mock drills. Please do the mock drills of the PPE. Inventory checklist. Right staff at the right time, scheduling shift in synchronization with routine traffic, alternative plan in case of staff shortage. Protection of the staff is of utmost importance. I again repeat, protection of the staff is of utmost importance, and staff illness and quarantine. And as Madam Dr. Nanda has told, all this biomedical waste, you have to be very careful, which we use in the critical care, suction tube, catheter, ET tube, ventilator tubing, aerobag, intercostal drain, central line, syringe in the red bag, ECG electrode, glucose strip, cotton, gauze, yellow bag, mask, yellow bag, gloves, red bag, goggles, red bag, apron, disposable, and linen apron, shoe cover and cap in the yellow bag, needles and sharp apples in the puncture-proof container, syringe cover, catheter cover, medicine cover, and stationery in the black bag, and ICD bottle and ampoules in the blue bag. What to avoid? To summarize repeatedly, I'm telling you, bag and mask ventilation, number 1. Number 2, NIV. Open suctioning. Please do close suctioning in case of the COVID-19 patient. Fiber optic bronchoscopy, supraglottic airway devices, circuit disconnection. Don't worry. Suppose circuit disconnection has happened. Put the ventilator in the standby mode. Clamp the endotracheal tube. Connect it. Then open it. Then turn on the ventilator. Don't feel scared. Nebulization, unless and until required, you do it. If you are doing, do a inline nebulization. Cough leak test, unplanned extubation. Please, how intubation is risky, extubation is also risky. The picture which I have shown you, please do a planned extubation. I have told you so many things. Do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. You must be very confused, just like this, the picture. But don't get confused. You all are corona warriors. You can do it properly. No, and what is not needed, you can don't it, and you will be successful and free from corona. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that nice presentation. This was on very important topic of do's and don'ts in the ICU, and I'm sure that you have taken the right message. The chat box is full with the questions, and I'm sure that you are all waiting eagerly to ask our panel lot of doubts. So I request you 2 things. The whole program is streaming in the YouTube. YouTube link is given in the chat box. So you can also see the whole educative training proceedings from the chat box. Second, Dr. Parija is working in the chat box answering all your questions. So you can put the questions, and at the end we'll take up the questions with us. So we have completed the initial institutional IPC, then the kidney and COVID, and also we have taken up the IPC, the infection prevention control, along with the important topic of biomedical waste. We have completed the testing protocol and do's and don'ts in the ICU. So with this, we have the final part of the donning and doffing of PPE, which Dr. P.K. Thatui will be covering. You all have seen multiple times, and now it is time to revise, to see a beautiful video, and just recapitulate the steps of putting or donning a PPE and taking out or doffing a PPE. And very soon, our panel will take up all your questions, put in the chat box, or now you can put, or you can ask directly after unmuting you. So I request Dr. Thatui to please take up the important topic of donning and doffing at the end.